Live from the world headquarters of RT America in our nation's capital, this is the news with Rick Sanchez.
Hi, everybody. I'm Rick Sanchez, and I do want to welcome our viewers from all over the world, including those of you who are watching us on your phones using the mobile app Portable TV. In case you have not noticed, and you probably have noticed, quotations here, the war on terror is finally ending. Of course, bureaucrats at the Pentagon, along with defense contractors and weapons manufacturers, would likely prefer that that does not happen. But even they are starting to realize that it's getting harder and harder to convince their partners in the corporate media to do stories on the necessity of a war with Iraq, the necessity of a war with Syria, a war in Afghanistan, a war in Yemen. Yeah, even the CNNs of the world aren't biting these days. So what do they need? What do those institutions need? What they need is a new war on terror, a new potential war, a new threat of war to continue doing what they have been doing during the war on terror, which followed the Cold War, which followed the Vietnam War, which followed the Korean War, which followed World War II. You get the picture. Constant state of war. So what will that replacement be? It's looking more and more like that will come in three parts, really. China, Iran, and Russia. That is the new focus. It's a shift that is happening as we speak, moving the threat emphasis from the Middle East to China, Russia, and of course, Iran. And now those countries, in turn, seeming to recognize the threat, are doing the same that I just described in the United States internally, and even conducting joint military exercises like the Ravkaz drills in Russia, which brought together Russian troops with those from China, with those from Pakistan, and those from Iran, and even India, who only bailed at the last minute because of COVID concerns. So, which came first? The U.S. making these countries feel threatened, or these countries truly posing a real threat? It's an interesting conversation, important one, by the way, as this happens as we speak in real time. We're going to tackle the issue here on the News with Rick Sanchez, where we believe it's time to do news again. Here is the list of the questions we think you'll be asking tomorrow after watching our newscast today. Is the Pentagon creating necessary enemies? And why? What are America's woes on her first presidential debate night? A lake with real water found on Mars? Really? Okay, I want to start today with a video of the Kavkaz 2020 joint military exercises being held in southern Russia. There they are. Exercises. They lasted about a full week, included a host of cooperating countries. Listen to this list: Iran, Armenia, Belarus, China, Myanmar, Pakistan, Azerbaijan, Indonesia, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Sri Lanka, even India, who, as I mentioned, only backed out at the last minute because of some COVID-19 issues. So here's the question. Are these exercises a direct result of U.S. adventurism, or is it the reason for U.S. adventurism? It's one of those, like, which came first, right? The chicken or the egg? This is important. Here's RT correspondent Alex Mihailovich setting this up for us.
From maritime drills at Russia's doorstep to ships patrolling the South China Sea, the U.S. Navy has spread out around the world and is creating tension in the backyards of others, including China. Here's U.S. Defense Secretary Mark Esper.
Not only is this region important because it is a hub of global trade and commerce, it is also the epicenter of great power competition with China. And in the face of destabilizing activities from the PLA, particularly in the maritime domain, the United States must be ready to deter conflict and, if necessary, fight and win at sea.
A conflict that Esper may be alluding to could be tied to a dispute in the South China Sea, where currently China, Vietnam, Malaysia, the Philippines, Indonesia, and Brunei all have overlapping territorial claims. While the countries involved have managed to move forward with the disagreement peacefully, the U.S. has stirred the pot in the region both through rhetoric and military patrols under the guise of freedom of navigation. Thousands of miles away, the U.S. is also pushing buttons in the Black Sea in Russia's neck of the woods. In July, Russia intercepted an American reconnaissance flight over the Black Sea, and the U.S. held military drills in the same area over the summer. And then, of course, there's Iran. Just last week, a U.S. aircraft carrier and several other warships passed along Iran's coast through the Strait of Hormuz in what the U.S. Navy describes as a scheduled maneuver. From the global economy to troubled waters, it is clear that China, Russia, and Iran are all being targeted by the U.S. However, that doesn't mean those countries aren't preparing to counter any attacks. This week, Russia concluded joint military drills in the Black and Caspian Seas, which included troops from Iran and China, as well as Armenia, Belarus, Myanmar, and Pakistan. Approximately 80,000 personnel participated in the drills, known as Kavkaz 2020. With common defense goals and the U.S. presence in their backyards, these joint exercises have become a staple for many of the nations involved.
Chinese Army units regularly join us in our military drills and war games. As for other, more distant countries, I don't believe that distance matters that much nowadays, given all the transportation options and ways to deploy troops over long-haul routes.
While many may deem U.S. naval behavior as threatening, it seems that America will not be backing down anytime soon. According to the U.S. Defense Secretary, he plans to expand the U.S. Navy's military might by adding both manned and unmanned surface and submarine craft to the naval fleet, while further exploring the use of artificial intelligence in warfare. For RT, I'm Alex Mihailovich.
And for more on this, we're joined now by John Sidelides, who's a geopolitical strategist at Trilogy Advisors, and Mohammad Marandi, who is a professor at the University of Tehran. My thanks to both of you, gentlemen. Professor, I think I would like to start with you. Iran, by joining in these military exercises, is giving the United States, an excuse to be adventurous. They're the cause for America's adventurism, no?
Well, I think the invasion of Afghanistan, of Iraq, the destruction of Libya, U.S. support for extremists in Syria, and, of course, the genocide in Yemen, where the Americans have been helping the Saudis, along with a very long history of U.S. involvement in different countries, such as Vietnam and elsewhere, I think are themselves evidence enough that the United States does not need any country to provide it with an excuse to launch attacks or destroy countries. And the only reason why the Iranians carry out such maneuvers is because it is the Persian Gulf. The United States is projecting power in a Gulf that's named after Persia, after Iran, just like the South China Sea, regardless of the territorial issues that exist between the countries of that region. It is called the South China Sea. So it is China's backyard and not that of the United States. So the United States thinks that the whole world is within their sphere of influence, yet it does not tolerate, if it cannot tolerate countries to have maneuvers in its own backyard, I think that's even a sign of how bad things actually are with the United States. And just one final point is that what the United States has done is that it has created so much chaos and destruction that now other countries are mimicking the United States. We see Turkey helping to destroy Libya, projecting power in Armenia and Azerbaijan, supporting extremists in Syria, Saudi Arabia doing the same, along with the Emirates in Yemen and in North Africa. So the Americans have not only created destruction, but they've also helped other countries to move in the same direction.
John, could you respond to that?
Yeah, first, let me just take exception with the premise of your correspondent's report earlier that somehow the U.S. is responsible for all of this global chaos. The U.S. Navy is doing what it's been doing for the last 70 years, since the Asian and European catastrophes of World War II, and that is providing for free and open shipping lanes and sea lanes of communication around the world so that every nation, America's friends, America's foes, and countries that are neither, are able to freely travel, trade, communicate, prosper, and ideally work together to preserve regional and international peace. That's what's happening here. Freedom of navigation operations in international waters and international airspace in the South China Sea, in the Black Sea, and in the Persian Gulf. And just the way China is able to conduct operations in the Western Hemisphere and the Caribbean Sea, the Russians are able to do so in the East Med, in the Atlantic Ocean, in the Pacific Ocean. As long as they're operating in international waters and international airspace, there's no provocation. So I dispute the premise of the basic argument here.
Let me have the professor respond to that. So, Professor, I think you heard what John is saying, that the United States are not acting as aggressors, they're acting as referees. That's all.
Well, I'd have to disagree with John, because just recently, I think you recall that an Iranian airliner flying over Syria was harassed by an American jet, and it faced a very dangerous situation. The footage from inside the aircraft, where people were screaming in fear, was evidence enough of what had happened. And the United States has stopped or has encouraged other countries to block Iranian shipping, all illegal according to international law. The United States has helped the Saudis blockade Yemen, the Saudis who've been carrying out genocide in Yemen. So and also imposing sanctions on Venezuela, on confiscating ships that they said were taking fuel to Venezuela, fuel to the people of Venezuela. So, Syria, Venezuela. So the United States is a referee, but it's one of those, it's a very corrupt referee that you sometimes see in some of these matches where the things are fixed beforehand.
Go ahead, John. Respond to the fact that the United States is not being a fair arbiter in these disputes, that they have a dog in the fight.
It's a very interesting perspective coming from Iran, given that Iran remains the world's leading state sponsor of international terrorism. It is engaged in an absolutely ruthless campaign of destabilization of countries in the Middle East, in Syria, in Iraq, in Bahrain, in Yemen, in Lebanon, supporting Hezbollah, in the Gaza Strip, supporting Hamas, and looking to extort and to threaten countries in Europe and in Asia once it's able to further develop its ballistic missiles program and to be able potentially to place nuclear warheads on those missiles. So there's a profound debate here about which country is acting in a rogue status, and I think there's an international consensus that it's Iran.
Two very smart men discussing a very important issue here. Good debate, gentlemen. My thanks to both of you for sharing your perspectives. We're really glad that we had you on. Thank you again. 2 years ago, scientists thought they had spotted what they believed to be large saltwater lakes under the surface of Mars. Now, researchers have not only confirmed the finding, but they've found even more lakes. RT correspondent John Huddy has more on this story for us.
It's an exciting discovery reported in the online journal Nature Astronomy. The title, Multiple Subglacial Water Bodies Below the South Pole of Mars Unveiled by New Marsis Data. Translation, there could absolutely be water on Mars. Researchers say they have found several liquid bodies of water under Mars's South Pole, proving previous research and studies there could be a large lake buried beneath the Martian surface. Think of it like subglacial lakes beneath Antarctica or the Greenland ice sheets here on Earth. But here's the kicker. The findings could be a key component in the search for alien life on the planet. Not necessarily little green men, but bacterial microbes or something akin to that. Researchers believe that there's a patchwork of buried reservoirs of liquid, a large reservoir about 15 miles across, surrounded by smaller patches up to 6 miles across. They can't tell how deep they are, only that they're about a mile below the surface. Much more research needs to be done, and some scientists remain unconvinced that what has been seen is indeed liquid water. But the latest study adds more weight to a 2018 finding from radar maps of Mars's crust created by the Mars Express robot orbiter. And the Mars discovery comes just a few weeks after scientists reported potential signs of life in the clouds of Venus. If there really are buried bodies of liquid water on Mars, it may be a prime spot for life, perhaps even a sign of a world teeming with life once upon a time, billions of years ago. For the News with Rick Sanchez, John Huddy.
And while we argue about things on Earth, we find new life possibly in places like Mars. What a day. This is the News with Rick Sanchez. You're watching our special coverage. When we come back, an exclusive interview with former UFC champion Mike Meir. My colleague Steve Christacco joins me to take you through this. I'm sorry, Frank, not Mike. Sorry about that, Frank. On this day, as America debates who will be president for the next 4 years, we will see the two candidates from the Republican and the Democratic parties square off, actually debate, while the rest of us debate, in a streamed live debate that can be seen all over the world. Debates are always important, but this year it comes amid a collection of conflicts and controversies, the likes of which our country has possibly never really experienced, at least not in coordination. Riots over racial inequality with police officials, a pandemic with no end in sight. Just in the last week, a bitter battle over a Supreme Court seat, and now a brewing battle over whether the President of the United States has paid his taxes. There is a lot there, and will likely be more tonight that's going to come up during the debate. Here to set the table for us is News with Rick Sanchez correspondent Farron Franzak. All right, get us started. I guess first, what, the riots, the brutality, the police
Right, yeah.
issue?
So we have that bombshell video that came out in the Breonna Taylor case where it showed that police officers there, after the whole scene was set, you had one of the officers, Officer Hankinson, he was lingering around the scene. That's a complete violation. Could possibly change the course of the case as we know it. You also have Portland. They're going into 120 days of straight protests. 24 were arrested Monday night. You have a police sergeant sent to the hospital. 5 were sprayed with chemicals. So no unrest there. Now we're talking, you know, also you mentioned SCOTUS, the whole thing with the Supreme Court decision. So Amy Coney Barrett actually is meeting with senators on Capitol Hill as we speak. Many Democratic senators saying that they're not even going to take a look at her. Her hearing is October 12th. It's 53-47 with 2 Republicans not voting of her passing, so it's most likely going to happen. What's interesting, though,
and this is a very conflictive thing to happen just before an election. And by the way, it's the third leg of the American system.
Yes, and the fastest someone has been appointed, it was actually the same day. It was Justice James Burns. He was nominated by FDR and then sworn in later that day. That's the shortest we've ever seen.
So that's going to come up tonight for sure.
For sure. But I mean, the shortest it's been since 1975 took 17 days to appoint a justice nominee. So there are talks about her, you know, taking down the Affordable Care Act, but Biden is focusing on that rather than the abortion debates, and she is of Catholic faith, and she is very much anti-abortion, but it's not going to switch anything.
And then there's the election itself. There's a lot of controversy going on as to whether the election is going to be fair or not, being raised by one side more than the other, and that would be the Trump side.
Right.
Who, by the way, we should mention, if you believe the polls, he's down.
Right, right. But then there's also, you know, the whole mail-in ballots, when are those going to get counted? Then you also have Pennsylvania looking more and more like Florida 2000, so we'll see with that. Then you have the Trump tax returns where we were laughing. It was only $750, not hundred thousands of dollars, $750. You had, you know, $70K going to haircuts, write-offs for that, $300K for Ivanka's makeup. Remember, he did pay $130
by the way,
to
this story that the New York Times is reporting, it goes against Trump's general messaging and his persona, which I think is a problem for him, and one we'll probably see in the news for quite some time.
Oh, for sure.
So you're setting the scene for us.
The debates are going to be rough tonight. And actually, Steve and I were talking. We think the family is going to get involved pretty soon. There's going to be jabs to the family members.
Speaking of that, I want to talk sports because, you know, it's funny. There's a lot of people who I know who are bigger sports fans than they are political fans. And Major League Baseball playoffs begin today, and many of them are not going to watch the debate. They're going to watch the baseball playoffs. So let's talk a little bit of sports here. When you think of one sport that's become vastly popular, UFC, you think tough, you think gritty, you think fighters who engage in a brutal sport. It's true, but they will tell you there's a lot more to this sport than meets the eye. What they're going to tell you is there's an art form to the sport, and there is. I raise this because you're about to meet one of the legends of mixed martial arts. His name is Frank Meir. My colleague first joins me, Steve Christakos, to take us through A lot of people who don't know who this fella is, other than the fact that he's extremely handsome and looking very strong. Who is Frank Mir?
He's very strong, very athletic. But if you are a fan of mixed martial arts in the MMA world, he is a legend. His name is synonymous with MMA, of course, Frank Mir. And, you know, he's one of the best. When you think about him, you think about UFC, the Ultimate Fighting Championship. He had a 16-year career. He has the most finishes, most submissions in the heavyweight division. So he dominated that heavyweight division for a long time. Former two-time heavyweight UFC champ. So let's get to it. Let's start talking to Frank.
He's a fighter, and he's ready to talk, and he's honoring us with his presence. Frank, how are you, my friend? Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm doing very well.
By the way, the art form part, a lot of people say, how can this be an art form? It looks brutal to me. Just like when my dad, who, by the way, is Cuban like yours, came to this country, saw a football game and says, that looks like 11 guys just jumping on top of each other. How do you convince people there is an art form to your sport?
You know, it's funny, my father's family also thought the same thing about football. Just a bunch of guys blow the whistle, run on each other. They never understood it. But yeah, no, mixed martial arts is like a lot of other sports where there is such strategy and technique behind it. There's a lot there. It's just that sometimes you have to peel it apart and really understand what's going on to really appreciate it. And I always actually akin that to, like, you know, watching a rugby game. Football game. If you don't understand the sport and you're watching it, you just think it's a bunch of guys brutally going after it. Once you start to learn it and break it down and understand what's actually occurring between the participants, and you can really appreciate the science behind it.
Yeah, Frank, and speaking of your father, of course, he got you into wrestling, I know, at a young age to avoid being submitted and to also learn how to submit people. And you have a lot of submissions. You have the fastest in the heavyweight division, I believe, or the second fastest submission at 45 seconds. You hold that record. So how much of an influence did your father have on you, teaching you wrestling from a young age? And then you got into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, of course, and used that technique and style as well with the UFC.
Yeah, my father actually, when he came over from Cuba, you know, martial arts, you know, boxing and wrestling and judo are very big there. So he brought that influence over to me, opened up a gym. And so I was just a little brat running around annoying everybody that was paying to be there. But and eventually I picked up on it and realized it was a very good way of life because those endeavors pushed me. I think too many people nowadays, they don't live a hard enough life because, look, we've won. Society is very successful. Most people, you know, live a very good, easy life. But the problem is that makes weak people. So that's why I use, even with my children I have a good life. Their life is easy. But I make it hard through the martial arts because now they have to constantly battle themselves. They have to do things that are tough, scary, hard. It tests who they are. And when they fail, you can sit there, pick up the pieces, and rebuild a much stronger version of yourself.
I got to ask you a question about what's going on, the climate and the environment on very aggressive sports like yours. People worry a lot about concussions. How concerned are you about all the head blows that you've taken? Because, man, you seem like you're super sharp, but I wouldn't want to see you lose that. Are you worried about that?
I think that's a concern that everybody has to have. You know, the science is really sort of showing what some of the things can occur with receiving damage. But the good thing is about our sport in MMA, the concussions aren't the same as they used to be in other sports. Whereas, you know, even in football nowadays is much safer. You see a guy take a bad hit, he's not allowed to continue into the game because the research has really shown that it's not really the first concussion you receive that day that causes a lot of damage. It's really that secondary and that third concussion. So, you know, if a fighter gets knocked out and he's able to recover and get up and continue fighting and he's been stunned, and we don't allow that to occur anymore. The days of a guy giving him, you know, his ability to show his fortitude, we've eliminated that. So now when guys get hurt, they get caught with a shot. You know, it's not completely 100% safe. I don't want to mislead anybody, but it's a part of doing business, and we try to make it as safe as possible. And obviously, I believe in that. I mean, I've had such a long career. I don't feel any ill effects from it. You know, and obviously that's anecdotal first-person experience, but I feel firmly enough in it that my daughter's probably actually having her first pro fight here coming up in October 19th. So that being said, I mean, if I was that worried about it, I probably would have my children doing it.
Yeah, and Frank, I know you're not quite done yet with your 20-plus year career in MMA, but recently you've been in Bellator after the UFC and then bare knuckle championship boxing. I hear some rumors that you might be joining them soon. Is there any decision on that?
Yeah, basically the contract's already there. Just a couple little things going back and forth with management as far as finalizing it to make it 100% official, but it's 99% there. I'm very much interested in it. I think, a bare knuckle boxing, because of the nature of the sport, it's not pure boxing, it's not pure MMA, because of the ability to box and grab and clinch all together. In itself, it's very similar to maybe dirty boxing and MMA. So I'm very interested in actually, I love the science of fighting and warfare. So I feel like right now that's an area that can really be evolved. The one thing that sometimes about mixed martial arts that can be a little disheartening for me is that we've had a lot of smart guys push the sport really far, and there's not a lot of new developments occurring. There's kind of a pattern set now that everybody understands and everybody trains.
Frank Mir, boy, I'll tell you what, great presentation. What a delight to be able to talk to you. Thanks for taking time to take us through your story, and hopefully we'll be able to see you again.
Awesome, I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, thanks to Frank, and thanks to you, Steve, for joining us for this interview. Good stuff. We'll see you again when it's time to do News Again.